Hi everyone, it's Nicole, and today I am going to be sharing how I put together this vintage Kite foundation paper pieced block using the vintage Kite paper from Fat Quarter Shop. This is foundation paper piecing, and I wanted to show just how easy it is. There are instructions inside of the paper pad that you buy from Fat Quarter Shop that make it very easy to see how to put it together. So I have a bunch of 3 1/4 by, or 3.5 by 4.5, I believe, rectangles here. The pattern is, the finished quilt pattern is a free download from Fat Quarter Shop, which I will link down in the description below, but you will need to purchase the vintage Kite foundation paper to put together your blocks. And I'm going to put together one block here on camera. I know foundation paper piecing seems maybe a bit intimidating, but it truly gives you the most perfect block. So we are going to take a sheet of paper from the paper pad, and on the dotted line down the center and then from side to side, we're going to cut this apart into 4 sections. We're basically going to be working with 4 sections per block. So putting together each section and then sewing them together to make our block. And I'm just using a ruler and my rotary cutter to cut this apart. And then I will go ahead and cut it again. And I've decided to keep this video in real time, so there's no sped up to make it a little bit maybe easier to show and understand. Now, I definitely think as you make more of these, it becomes easier. So the more you make, the quicker you can go. This is an optional step, and Kimberly shows this in her video, which I want to mention here. She has a very in-depth video. I'm going to link to that down below as well. So definitely check that out. But this is a great ruler for foundation paper piecing. Anytime I make the marker bags or anything else I've made with foundation paper, I use these rulers. And she shows that middle line around section 1, just using the skinny edge of the ruler and bending that paper. And the reason you do this is when you flip it over, it's going to make it easier to see where to put your glue. And you don't have to use glue if you don't want to, but honestly, I find it's so much easier to use this Sewline glue. So that is what I am using. And you'll notice that my paper pulls right off and everything. A little bit later, it comes right off. So it's not going to be a permanent type of glue. So I am simply folding all 4 sections at one time. And then we are going to take the Sewline glue and place it on the back of section 1. You will be sewing on the side of the paper that has all the instructions. Your fabric is going to be on the back side. So see this little dot or kite section, we're going to take our Sewline glue pen, and I just draw like a little squiggle of glue. And we're going to take one of our rectangles, and in this case, I am doing my kite in color and then the block around it in a low volume print. I have also seen, though, that you could do the kite itself in low volumes and then the area around it in color if you want. Then you're going to bend your paper, and I'm taking the other side of that ruler with the little ridge, and I am cutting the excess fabric away, leaving a 1/4 inch seam. Because we've glued our fabric to the paper, it's not shifting. Next, we're going to take our low volume prints. You will notice that our pattern print was going vertically. Our low volume is going to be more horizontal. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to hold it in place here, and then I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine. So I'm going to go ahead and prep a few more blocks, and I'm going to show how I do all of this step at once so that I'm only going like back and forth to my sewing machine a few times instead of back and forth between each section of the block. I like to do several blocks at once. So I would glue the rectangles to the foundation paper, trim it down, and I'm going to make a whole stack of these. Then I'll go over to the sewing machine and I'll sew a bunch of them all at once. Then you can really mix and match, especially if you're doing a scrappy version of this. You can mix and match how you put your kites together. I'm doing a lot of the same block, I guess I want to say, but they'll all be mixed up on the quilt. And then I will choose 4 different fabrics the next week and mix and match those together. So once I have these, we are going to go over to the sewing machine, and the glue just again holds that down in place. Just like that. So I'm at my sewing machine and I am not going to pin the cross stitch, the Lori Holt fabric that I'm using with the My Mind's Eye fabric. I'm not going to pin it. I don't find that I need to necessarily with this. With some foundation paper piecing, I do, but for this, I really don't think I need it. I'm going to have my seam press tool or my seam roller there from Lori Holt handy. This is great for not having to go back and forth to the iron constantly. I know in Kimberly's video for Fat Quarter Shop, she used it as well. I really thought that I would never use this tool, but it comes in so handy. You want to make sure your stitch length is very short. I'm using a 1.2 stitch length because you want to be able to tear away the paper when you're completely finished with the block. So I'm going to sew the first side between section 1 and 2. I'm going to open that and I'm going to use that seam press roller to just press that nice. Then I am going to take my second rectangles between section 1 and 3. I'm checking something. Making sure that everything is going right. And we're going to do the third section. So again, laying that in place, lined up with the edge of the piece that we trimmed, and we're going to run this through our sewing machine right along the line. And I'm so sorry, I did not notice that my camera is kind of far away. But just know I am following that line that we use the ruler on. Again, I'm going to open that up and use my seam roller just to kind of press that out. I'm going to set it aside then, and I'm going to do the other 3 or however many I want to do, because then we're going to trim it and put all 4 of the pieces together. So let's go ahead and sew up a few more of these. I'm just going to move that to the side, and I have all of these ready to go. So this is what I was talking about as far as like mass producing. I love doing multiples of these and then doing all of my pressing, then doing all of my trimming, and then sewing the block together and doing all the final steps. I find that it just eliminates the back and forth and back and forth. But you can do it however you want. I do recommend with any block, whether it be foundation paper piecing or traditional piecing, I think it's easiest to do one first. So I actually did a block before I only trimmed the fabric for the first block. I didn't trim out all of my rectangles or anything like that. I trimmed it out and sewed up one complete block, so I had a good understanding of how everything worked before I started with the kind of mass production. I would love to know in the comments if you do foundation paper piecing, if you're sewing along with the Vintage Kite quilt along. If you're going to make the full quilt, or if you're going to make something smaller, or you're going to make a table runner or table topper or something to that effect, let me know down in the comments. And I just like to line it up. It's going to give you the perfect points. And it really is quite fun. I did not think that I would be a foundation paper piecing kind of girl, but I've got to say that I really love it. I know I've shared a few other things, and I have several others that I want to make. This is going to be what I kind of consider, it's more simple. There's less foundation steps. However, lining up points so that your points are perfect is the important part. And this paper makes it so that creating this block is much easier than the traditional way of piecing. Because it's my understanding that this is a block that you can make with templates. But obviously following the lines on paper is just going to help make it so that they're perfect. All right, we're going to go over to my pressing mat, and I just have my wool pressing mat here and my little mini iron, and I am going to press these really well, no steam. Since there is paper on the back, I don't want the paper wet. I just want to have these nice and flat, since I used the seam roller when I was at my machine. And then we are going to trim up our blocks. And to do that, let's just move the wool mat out of the way. We're going to flip them over and follow the instructions. So it says first trim line. Let me flip this over and show you. So along the little skinny edge, and I'm going to show first trim line. That is the line that we want to follow first. So right there. And I finally got smart and turned off my overhead light, so there should not be a glare. I'm so sorry. And I'm going to use my ruler and my rotary cutter, and we're going to clean up the edge. Then we're going to go to the other one that says, the other side that says first trim line. And we're going to trim this. Now at this point, you could really leave it, but I like to have a triangle to work with. So from that outer that says final trim line, I am going to trim 1/4 of an inch away from that. You don't want to trim on the line, you want to trim 1/4 of an inch away. That's our final trim line once we have our block all together. I'm going to do this for the remaining 3 sections for our block. So again, first trim line, and I like to line it up. I generally take my time with the trimming because you don't want to cut wrong. Making sure my ruler is lined up and trimming away. And again, this is a step that you don't have to do right now if you don't want to, but I like to have it nice and clean for assembly. So 1/4 of an inch away from that final trim line. And you can kind of see the points now. I'm going to move those back into the camera so that you can see the sections that we have. What I love, and you're going to notice this throughout my quilt, that the majority of my quilt is the My Mind's Eye Honeybee collection. I bought a couple of layer cakes that I'm using from this. And then I have the Lori Holt cross stitch fabric. That's the little crisscross fabric, and it matches perfectly. But I needed some additional fabric from my stash. So this little gray dot is actually a Bonnie and Camille. I needed some more gray prints. The Honeybee collection doesn't have a ton of gray prints. There's a couple, but I felt like I needed a couple more. And instead of going and buying something, if you've seen any of my Flosstube videos, then you have seen the wall of fabric behind me. You know that I have plenty of fabric. So I just went and found a couple that I thought coordinated back to the color of gray in the Honeybee collection. And I love to do that. I think it's Joanna Figueroa of Fig Tree has that rule. I can't remember her percentage of how much of a collection to use and then to mix in a couple of other things. And I never realized that that was kind of a thing until she said that, and I love it. I think it's perfect. So here's what my block's going to look like today. And I have it all trimmed up. I went ahead and discarded all of those extra pieces. And now the pinning. And this is very important. And the paper, the foundation paper, makes it so easy. So let me grab my pins. We're going to pin 2 sections together and then the other 2 sections together, and then we'll sew the final section. We'll sew those 2 together. So there is a little circle, and I'm going to put my pin. Actually, I find it easier to, don't do it this way. I lied. Take the pin out. But take your 2 sections, line them up how you think they're going to go, and then place your pin through that circle and then flip it over. And I was not lined up. It should go through the circle, or the little dot, I should say, on the other side. And I am too close to my camera. I'm sorry, I did not notice I was too close. But you want the pin to go through both of those. So what I do is I pierce through there, and when I get it, I keep the pin there, and I keep it straight up and down. Just like that. Once I have those 2 lined up, I pin on either side, and then I'm going to pin out at the end, and I'm going to pin at the center. And here I can't stress enough, at least for me, that pinning makes all the difference. So up until this point, I haven't pinned. But now we're going to do the pinning, because we do not want our points to be wonky. We want all of those connections to be perfect. Let's do that for the other 2 sections. I'm just going to lay those down together, and I'm going to pierce through that little dot. And we want to make sure that it's going to be in the right spot, and I literally just double and triple check it. That's the first place I pin, and then when I have it, I'm going to keep my pin straight up and down, and we're going to pin at each end and on either side of that pin, and then we're going to go take it over to our sewing machine and sew these 2 pieces together so that we can put the whole thing together. And this is another section when we're sewing that the seam roller comes in handy. And I just say take your time with this step. It gets a lot easier as you go and you kind of develop a rhythm. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine. And I am going to sew along that stitching line. And you can see the dashed stitching line. The instructions make it very, very easy. And we're going to sew down this line. I pull my pins as I go. I don't sew over them. And I pull them right as I come to them. And we're going to do the other side, or the other half. And when I open this up, look at that. Oh my gosh, you guys, it's so pretty. I'm just going to lay it there for a minute. I'll take my seam roller to it. You can use your iron as well. It's just super handy at if your sewing station isn't right next to your iron, to use that seam roller. And we're going to just do the exact same thing to these other 2. And then we're going to open them up. And I want to nest that center seam. You could open it and press it open and line them up. But for me personally, I like nesting this seam, and the final seam I am going to press open. Just do it however you want. I literally just kind of found what was working for me. Just going to press that. And nesting that center seam is working great. So I'm going to nest that, and I'm going to pin where I'm nesting it, and then again we're going to go through the little circle dot on each side to make sure we're lining up that point where our kite sections meet. And that was perfect. I just went ahead and went right through that one. We're almost to the end. Hopefully this has taken some of the, if you haven't tried foundation paper piecing, it's taken some of the mystery out of it. I definitely recommend watching the Fat Quarter Shop video. As I said, it goes into much more depth. There you can see a very good example of the pin going through that dot on each side. It's exactly what we want right there. I just thought, I asked on Instagram if you guys wanted to see this, and I had yes. So I thought, well, I will show you guys what I do. Lower my presser foot, and we're going to sew along that middle seam. And again, I only want to remove the pin right as I come to it, sewing right on the line. That is the key with foundation paper piecing, is sewing right on the line, especially something like this block. It's not really wonky. It's perfect little points. If you saw my rainbow paper pieced marker bag, that one's a little wonkier and probably a little more forgiving. This one, you really want to line everything up. And with the paper, it's super easy. Oh my gosh, look at that, you guys. Okay, we're going to go back over to our desk and our pressing mat, and we want to press that seam open. So I am going to actually, let's just do a quick seam press along that line. Set our seam, and we're going to open it up, and then we're going to open up our seam and press this. And no, I have not removed the paper yet. Do not remove the paper at this point, because see the final trim line all the way around our block? Before you remove your paper, you do want to trim on that final trim line. So I like to give it a very good press. Make sure we get our seam nice and open. I'm going to flip it over and just press the front. Again, a nice dry iron. Look how pretty this block is. Oh my gosh. I'm super excited to see how this quilt's going to look. So now, again, I'm going to flip it over and grab my ruler, and we are going to trim with our rotary cutter around the final trim line. This is what is going to completely clean up our block. So right there where I'm pointing to, that's our final trim line. And we're going to simply trim and rotate. And again, it's all about just kind of measure and then measure again. Double check before you ever cut anything. Always make sure you're trimming right on that line. And I am also using the lines on my ruler to make sure that I have nice 90-degree angles. I want everything to be very, very clean and squared up. And then the most satisfying part of this project is pulling off the paper. So because we use that really tiny stitch length, we are going to pull off the paper. I like to go ahead and pull mine off now. I know that I have heard some people leave it on, but I do not. I want it gone immediately. I find it really comes right off. If you've used a tiny stitch length, you're golden. But if it gives you any trouble, make sure you just kind of bend it back on itself, and then it's like, a perforation, and you simply just pull it, tear it off. That little section there where the kite is the hardest one, I think. And again, that's the one we glued on, and you can see there's no residue. Completely good. and just make sure you get all the paper. So I tend to work one little section at a time, and I am looking to see if I have pulled all of my paper off. And once we have all the paper off, that's when I give my block a final press. I usually put some wood blocks on top of it to hold it down and hold it nice and flat. When I am sewing each week's blocks, I sew them all and then I pull all the paper off at once and give them a final press. So even though I'm just showing you sewing one of them right here, know that when I am sewing these for myself and not for video, I am doing it more assembly line style or kind of mass producing each step. And here I'm just going along, making sure I'm peeling off all the paper. If you need to, some little tweezers will help you grab any little sections. I actually have never used any tweezers. I find I can get it all off. And here I'm just bending that back. That little tiny triangle there. You're going to end up with the perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance from the tip of the kite to the edge of the block. Exactly what you're looking for. And because we're pulling off the paper, it does, I think, need a final press when you're done, just to flatten it all out, since we've kind of been pulling and, you know, moving those seams around on the back. Little tiny piece there. And I find by working section by section, that's how you don't miss any of that paper. If you have any questions, please make sure and leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you're sewing along with the vintage Kite quilt along. Let me know what fabrics you're using. I always love seeing everybody's progress. And here is a look at the 2 different combinations I'm using for this week's blocks, and I've got 4 of these total. Super, super pretty, and I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, click that like button, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to always be notified when I have a new Flosstube stitching or quilting video. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.